Hey kids, you ready for some hot anime nonsense? This game's got everything you could ever want. It's got an anime opening, it's got JoJo stands, it's got an otherworldly sci-fi apocalypse going down, it's got all the flashy Platinum Games action you could ever want, and it's got fashionable police Kevlar? Yeah, that sounds like a thing anime would do. Astral Chain is a ridiculously over-the-top romp in the best way. From the very first moments that see you gunning down enemies from the back of a motorcycle to its biggest, hypest boss fights. Both in aesthetic and mechanical execution, Astral Chain is 100% about the rule of cool. But speaking of execution, it's time to see how well this game works. So, let's dive in. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today we're saving humanity from interdimensional horrors in Astral Chain. The star of the show here is easily Astral Chain's combat system, which sees you controlling not one, but two characters at once. You've got your standard hack-and-slash tools to work with, including a surprisingly dynamic dodge roll and some fancy dash attacks, but the real fun comes from controlling your Legion, which you can either send out to whack things or manually control the movement of. But perhaps the coolest touch of all is how the game gave the chain connecting you to the Legion its own set of mechanics. Most games would have looked at this chain as a cool aesthetic touch and left it at that, but in this game it's an interesting, multifunctional tool in its own right. At its most basic, you can wrap the chain around an enemy to bind and stun it for a brief period, but you can also use the chain to zip to your Legion and close on an enemy instantly, chain attacks into multiple enemies, and even as a clothesline against charging opponents. A lot of the chain's abilities are somewhat situational, but they also do a ton to deepen the gameplay and make you look stylish as heck. And that's just covering the basics. There's all kinds of combo attacks you can execute in certain situations, extra abilities you can teach your Legion, and the fact that you can swap between multiple Legions mid-fight. And if you're getting a little dizzy trying to keep all of that in your head, you're not alone. Astral Chain's combat isn't all that complicated once you get the hang of it, but there are just so many moving parts to it that it's going to take a while to remember all of your options. I think so far I've spent a solid hour, a full fifth of my game time, just doing tutorials learning all the different cool shit I can do in a fight. But mind you, this isn't a bad thing, because once you've memorized all the tools available to you in Astral Chain, combat becomes an absolute trip. I dare say it all feels a little Devil May Cry-ish. You won't be racking up 100-hit combos like Dante, but the core appeal of DMC's combat is less about stiff challenges and more about giving you a boundless repertoire of toys to express exactly how you want to dismantle those obstacles. And in that regard, Astral Chain hits the same sweet spot, what with all the different Legions you can swap out on the fly, the numerous tricks you can pull with the chain itself, and the multiple talent trees complete with even more abilities you can teach your Legion. Once I got my feet under me and started scraping a little beneath the surface, Astral Chain began to reveal one of the most entertaining and dynamic combat systems I've played all year. And as an added bonus, it's also one of the coolest to watch. But I've just spent half this review babbling on about one system, and there is so much left to cover, including a ton of gameplay outside of combat. Even if your main job is exterminating monsters from beyond our dimension, you're still a part of the police, and that means you also do a lot of detective work and helping out your local community by doing minor side quests. A typical chapter in Astral Chain starts off with you getting assigned a case you have to solve, then you mess around and talk to people at your home base for a little bit before setting off to get sleuthing. This drops you into one of several small open-world zones where you'll do the usual video game thing and talk to every NPC you come across. Some of them give you keywords that'll help you solve your case, while others give you quick side missions to do. And once you've 100%ed the area and found all the possible clues, you reconvene with your teammates and put the pieces of the case together by having them ask very pointed questions at you and picking the right answer from that list of keywords you built up. Then after that, all hell usually breaks loose and you start jumping across dimensions, where you'll spend your time whacking bad guys around, punctuated by platforming, some light puzzles, and lots of vacuuming up red matter. So much red matter. Eventually you'll put down a boss or two, and it's back to the precinct to crack open a cold one until it's time for the next mission. If I'm being honest, there are other games out there that handle detective work far better than Astral Chain does. Most pointedly, the game I reviewed just last week, Telling Lies. Astral Chain makes an effort by giving you a dozen options to pick from, but at the end of the day, cases are still multiple choice questions that only ever ask you to memorize and spit back information the game just told you 10 minutes prior. The platforming, meanwhile, can feel a little bit clunky, and the exploration can be interesting and highly rewarding, but hunting down every single scrap of red matter can be a tedious exercise that I don't recommend you engage in. As they are, Astral Chain's side activities are passable, but the only reason I'd miss them if they were cut from the game entirely is because of how that would affect the narrative and pacing. Which, speaking of, the narrative so far is similarly decent, if perhaps not yet riveting. It picks up in the midst of a sci-fi apocalypse that sees mankind gasping its last few breaths. A majority of the world has become uninhabitable, and the rest of humanity has gathered on a single island dubbed the Ark. But their troubles don't end there, as monsters known as chimeras show up periodically to make havoc and kidnap people back to their dimension. And of course, the only ones able to fight them are an elite peacekeeping organization that have repurposed captured chimeras into weapons of war that they wield against their extra-dimensional foes. So is anyone else getting some Ava vibes here? I'm getting some Ava vibes here. In the moments where it decides to break out the bombast and kick the tension up to 11, the narrative plays like an ultra-hype shonen anime, and I am there for that. If nothing else, this game knows how to raise the stakes and put our main character in a pinch. But outside of its climaxes, the narrative has yet to really sell me on its characters or the quieter moments that are supposed to tell us about them. That said, after 5 hours and only 3.5 chapters completed, it still feels like I'm just starting to break into the game's second act, and there's plenty of room left for it to pick up later and deliver an awesome conclusion. I'm just saying that from what I've seen so far, if the narrative does pick up, it's going to take a while to get there. But speaking of getting places, it's time we get to asking, what do you get out of 5 hours with Astral Chain? I've been having a lot of fun with it, but this definitely is one you need to invest a bit more time into. With a tutorial that feels like it's still going at the 2-hour mark, a narrative that feels like it's only just starting to move, and a combat system that you can't just pick up and start playing around with, Astral Chain takes a while to really get going. And I can't say you'll get too much out of the first few hours. All that said, however, the game has still been fun from the very first moment, and if you can find the time, it only ever gets better. While Astral Chain might not have ended up the usual thing I look for on this channel, I still feel pretty safe calling it a good game. While significant parts of it, like the detective work, are just kind of whatever, they're by no means a misery to slog through, and the real core of the game, the combat, is just incredible. If you can invest a little bit of time, this game will reward you. If you're looking for more hype-as-heck action games that ooze with cool, consider jumping over to the roguelike Wizard of Legend, which I covered in an old quarterly wrap-up. And if you want to see a mystery investigation done right, check out last week's review of Telling Lies. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. If you did, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button. If you're looking for games that value your time and don't pad themselves, I'm your guy. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.